So Martin guitars from about 2012 to about 2016, 18, they've got binding issues. Whether it's the adhesive or the actual plastic celluloid material shrinking, the binding very, very often, actually always, comes away. Usually at the waist first and then everywhere else. I've got 3 guitars in at the moment, all Martins from the same period, that have exactly the same issues. So this video I'm going to show you how to repair it properly. I'll also tell you about some ways, different ways that work, and some materials to use, but they're not as good as the way I'm going to show you, which is the best way for longevity, for everything to hold and stay put. So there's 2 things I want to sort of mention. Most often at the waist, the binding from Martin guitars at this period, it shrunk away so much that it is actually hard to push it in. This one is about a little over 1/8 of an inch, and I have to use force to get that middle part in, but then the parts here and here are still in the air. So the binding is just shrunk, and if you glue it back like that, you'll have issues. So before I get into showing you the best way to do it, I'll show you some other ways which aren't as good. But most often the material of the binding, whatever it is, has shrunk and has pulled away. This is about 1/8 of an inch away, and I need to actually put a fair bit of force on that to get it into the middle, but it doesn't. I can get it into the middle or the center of the waist, but it's still not fitting here, and it's just not going to happen. So one way to fix that, which I don't think you should do, but I'm going to show you anyway, is to make up a sort of a heat guard, and you just put that over the edge like that, or over the binding, and you use a heat gun or a hairdryer, and you just heat up that part of the waist, the binding just in the waist, this area, rock it back and forth a little bit just so it's not just hot there and then cold. You do want it to be a little bit warmer on the edges, and then that heats up the binding and you can push it in. The trouble with that is, not that I'm a chemist and know a lot about plastics, it still wants to go back to where it was, to shrink back, even though you are heating it up so it relaxes it. It's like sort of taffy or something almost, and you push it in, it seems to pop out again. The other thing I wanted to show you, which I don't recommend, is what Martin recommend using, which is 3M PR600 CA glue. That cost me like $50 for that. Re-gluing binding with CA glue requires some very careful masking, and then there's always finish work at the end, touch-ups. You can sand through, which is a disaster. It's just, if you get drips with CA glue over nitro, you're screwed. It's just not a good idea. What is a good idea is something that I found that a gentleman called Doug Graham, he's an authorized Martin warranty repair guy and a member of the Loothgroup, and he was telling us about this new glue that he found. And the new glue is a water-based glue, so you can just get it on a top, and as you'll see later, and it's totally fine. But this glue is canopy glue. This is like $6 a bottle. Apparently this stuff is used in the RC remote control aeroplane industry. When they skin a balsa wood wing or something, this stuff is used. It's clear, fast drying, bonds canopies and plastic parts to almost anything, remains flexible. So that's the glue I'm going to be using for both this top and the back. But there's a few other tricks that I have up my sleeve, and one of them is a brand new Scalpel blade, number 11. Also I use 15C, and you will need one of these to do this job the best possible way. So the thing with canopy glue, and why I mentioned the difficulty of pushing the binding in when it's shrunk so much, is that canopy glue isn't as strong as the CA glue. It's just not meant to be, and in some ways that's better. But if you try and use canopy glue on a waist area that's requiring force to push in, it ain't gonna hold. So don't use it for that unless you want to redo your own work and don't get paid for it. So the trouble with the bindings is they're shrinking. How to remedy that? The best way to remedy that isn't just spot gluing it, it's to release the entire section and re-glue. So I've already done this side from the waist up to the upper bout, and by totally releasing this quarter of the back, I've released 50% of the tension on this side of the binding. This area here is still originally glued, but one day it will come away. However, having released this completely, it may not, I'm not sure. But if it does, I would probably release from here all the way to here as well. But at the moment, I'm just going to go back to here. The very best way is to pull the entire binding off the entire back and re-glue it starting in the middle. Yes, you do end up with a gap here, but if I glue this back, then this part's going to come back and need doing. Then this part will release, and then this part will release because it still has all the tension in it. So do yourself a favor, do it properly, and just bite the bullet and release at least the top half, and you will be happy. After I do this, I'm going to add a little bit of material in here to fill the little gap. So at the moment, just because I've released only one side, the gap is about 1/16 of an inch, and you can take into account that you'll end up somewhere with a gap of 1/8 to 1/4 inch, which is 3 mil to 6 mil. This stuff shrinks a lot. For the top, there is going to be the same procedure, but I'm going to show you how to wiggle this out of here. There won't be any loss of binding material here because the binding goes under the fingerboard by about ranges, but you know, 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. So we can very carefully pull that out and relax it all so it's fitting perfectly. Now comes the fun, scary part. Sometimes this stuff just pulls apart, but it is a good idea to use a nice sharp new scalpel blade to cut along the binding seam so you don't get any chipped finish. You still will, and that is a symptom of this process, this problem that Martin has. If you want, or if the customer wants finish touch-ups, that's a whole separate charge. And it's something I don't recommend either, because this is an ongoing problem. Probably will be an ongoing problem for this sort of binding. And if you spend $500 or charge $500 for a nice finish touch-up so it's all perfect, it might still happen back here, and then you're just chasing your tail for another 5 years. So what I'll show you actually is how easy this can be to just pull away. So I can push that up, and this is pulling away pretty easy from where it is not glued to, but I'm not going to force that. So that little part here, that's already checked and cracked, so that makes it easy to score. This is the part where it's kind of fading into being glued, but you can see here that that's what it looks like, and probably will look like when it's giving away. It's a good start to the scalpel blade when you're scoring it. Just going to score this. It's already pulling apart right here. So I've done the back, so I'm just going to have to do the side now. Same procedure, just cut along the binding edge, and you just want to score all the way down. Now it's probable that the finish is already checked, just because that's what happens with this sort of thing, which is actually a good thing. It kind of guides the scalpel blade. Now I just have to work the binding off, which is a slowly but surely process. I like to use a round spatula thingy, whatever this is called, and put it onto the ledge, binding ledge, and then kind of roll it forward like that, so it just cuts the glue line, or releases the glue line rather. And you can do that on this side as well. And that's released up to here now, so that's good. So this is just coming away really easy now. Got that much done. If this is looking too big, which it kind of is for the upper bout, let's grab a smaller one. And the last little bit. So now it's released from here to here, and probably go back just a touch more. I mean, the more the merrier that you release. And so while it was 1/16 of an inch before, if I push this all in hard, now we have that much gap. Ooh, how did it turn out? I don't know. But if you like and subscribe, you'll find out. Leave a comment, like, subscribe if you so desire. I hope you do. Hope you're getting information out of this video. Thing to do now is to clean up the ledge of the binding and also the inside of the binding. And there is one tool for that. Let me show you. That is the Ryan Gerber scrapers. These are fantastic. So these are the Gerber scrapers. They're actually called LOOTH HOES. They're 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch, 3/8, and it's 1/2 inch. But these are the things you want to buy to do this job, especially if you do it professionally. They're just perfect. Just get one. 25 bucks, just get one. If you're going to start with any, I would get the 1/4 inch one. Even though it's big enough, I'd probably do like the 1/4 inch and the 3/8, which are the two middle ones. But the 1/8 inch one is really good for purfling ledges. When you route a back or top, you want to route downhill. So this is downhill, so the grain is going here. And so you want to scrape in the same direction that you route. So that direction, and downhill, you just go from where it's widest to the waist, and from the widest part of the upper bout to here. If I scraped from the waist up here, I would be scraping kind of against the grain and I'd get tear out. Start just feeling the surface. You don't need to go hard straight away. And you just want to remove the old glue residue. For this surface, this ledge, it doesn't really matter what direction you go. So I could, having said everything I just said about this surface, I can just go up here. One thing that is good about having the 1/8 of an inch width is the closer you get to this area here where it's where the binding becomes glued again, it's harder to get the wider scrapers in there, but this 1/8 one can really get in pretty far. Really, I recommend us buying them all. So all this old glue residue has to be removed before we re-glue this with canopy glue. So you just want to remove any fuzzies and little bits, like this little thing there. There's just heaps of those all in just everywhere basically. And this edge here, you want that to be clean as well. So just clean up any fuzzies all the way around. This part's always a bit tricky because it's very difficult to get any type of tool in to remove the glue the closer you are to where it's still glued. And I'm going uphill here, but I'm kind of, you can't see this, but I'm angling this in, so it's I'm just getting the very corners, so I'm not actually kind of hitting the trouble area. Likewise, this area, just get in there and clean it, and then the 1/8 width can almost fit into this troublesome area here, but not quite. This is the 15C blade. Small, but the curved nature can kind of get the glue a bit better. So for cleaning the actual binding itself on the inside of the binding, I usually reach for a slightly wider Gerber scraper and then just move it off the back of the guitar and just try and scrape it as best you can. Just protect the surface of the guitar, of course. Just be careful how much you twist this binding. I'm rotating this about 90 degrees, but you do run the risk of snapping it. And for this tighter area, again, the 15C blade is good. After I scrape it, I'll come back with a little bit of a piece of sandpaper on a hard block and clean it up. I'm just going to lightly sand the very bottom, being careful not to hit the side, so it's probably best to do a depth stop with your fingers. I find sanding the very bottom a little bit easier than scraping it because it's so thin. You can also just scuff this up. Alright, so this binding is ready to be re-glued. The ledge is clean and clear of old glue, as is the two surfaces of the binding. Pretend this is some binding. The main gluing surface and also the bottom. And the binding ledge is cleaned, as is the bottom of the ledge. So all we have to do now is blob some canopy glue on there and tape it down. But there is another trick that I want to show you, and that is to use another piece of binding. So, you know, just buy the tallest binding you can, and that is going to come in handy. Pretend this is binding. When you glue this to the binding ledge and you put more pressure on the top with tape as you roll it over, this can slip out like that, exaggerated, and the side of the guitar is not flush with the side or the binding. So that extra binding will remedy that, which is a very good thing. So I just have some water with an old paintbrush. I have my extra binding, and I just have some orange tape from StewMac. Okay, so you'll see how fast I work. There is one trick you can do, which is to pre-tape a few bits of tape just to the table. I used to do this a lot back in Sydney. Not so much anymore, but it is a very handy thing to do, especially when you're starting out doing binding. The other thing I'm going to do is glue this entire thing in one hit. And again, I don't care if it's messy because it doesn't need to be clean because it is a water-based glue. I mean, I can just do that and it doesn't matter. So I just blob it on. I want good squeeze out. There's no need to be dainty with any of this glue. I mean, I did put a bit too much on, to be honest. And all this will come off the next day. Even after it's dried, it's quite easy to take it all off just with a little bit of water. It's really the best way to do this job. So just make sure you've got enough on that end. So you can see how much squeeze out I've got there. That's totally fine. What I've done, I've overlapped this, and I'm just overlapping it, the binding, concentrating on the bottom. So I'm putting the top of the extra binding close to the bottom of the old binding, just to keep the bottom edge in. Really good trick. I forget where I learnt that. What I really should have done is have this binding kind of end like there, but it's alright. So there's the binding gap in here. Just clean that out because that'll be getting filled tomorrow. And to be just on the safe side, fill up these a little bit. Because we've released this doesn't really need to be done, but this is how I lay down binding or tape binding up when I'm doing a new build, so I just do it here too. So this is a separate guitar with a separate issue, but I'm still using the canopy glue. This is a 1970s Martin, I forget what it was, but the binding hadn't shrunk. It was a complete adhesion failure. So the bindings were actually in perfect condition and the right length. So what I did, I started from the heel and just slowly worked my way around, and I didn't have to, loosen or anything the binding. I just glued it up normal. It was just like kind of almost building a guitar, and there was no gap at the heel cap or anything. So that's just another totally separate issue to shrinking binding, but effectively the how you go about dealing with it is the same. So the top, everything else is the same apart from when we get to the very corner. This requires a little bit of finesse, but it's just finesse that involves a whole lot of wiggling. Buy yourself one of these little guys or girls and it will all be good. So I've just released the binding right up to the neck. Now I'm just going to wiggle it out, pull that out until I get enough excess to push this in, which might be like 1/8 of an inch. This is shrunk a lot more than the back. What I'll do, I'll put a bit of tape just to indicate any movement that we're making. So that tape's right up against the edge there. So just up and down. Sometimes a little bit of water helps things, but not always. That's just about to pop out. And there is about 6 seconds of material here that we can use, which is good. We actually may need all of it. So I'm just going to push the binding in and okay, no, we've got plenty here. So that's the binding all in place, and that's how much we're going to have, which is about 2 seconds it came back. Yeah, it's not as much as I thought. So when I push all this in, all the binding into where it should be and push it back, we have about 2 seconds. The binding has moved back. So it shrunk 2 seconds, which isn't very much, but that required a whole bunch of force to push back in. So 2 seconds, while it doesn't sound very much, is enough to catastrophically ruin the binding on a insert high number here, Martin. So the procedure is exactly the same as before on the back. You just clean up the edges of the binding on the inside and the bottom, and also the side of the ledge and the bottom of the ledge, and then canopy glue. Releasing the entire upper bout like this is absolutely the best way to fix a Martin binding when the waste is difficult to push in. If it just goes in nicely, and some vintage guitars do, it's more the adhesive is let go rather than the binding material shrinking. But in this case, it's the binding material is shrinking, so this needs to be done, in my opinion. Top is all glued up. Exactly the same procedure. Slipping the binding back in under the fingerboard extension is really easy, but if it's tight, just scrape a tiny bit away from the inside of the binding, or that might even happen if you use some sandpaper or something just to clean up the glue. A tiny bit of material's removed, therefore it's a bit thinner there before it goes in a bit easier. But if you have trouble, just thin it until it slips in. Remember, there'll be glue there, so it'll pack out a bit. With the canopy glue, just leave it overnight, and I think it says tape parts together, drying time for handling is 3 hours with full cure in 24 hours. I'll be taking the tape off tomorrow morning-ish, just cleaning up the residue, and I'll show you that, but this is done. And that's how you fix Martin binding the best way, just the most thorough way. The more thorough way is just to take the entire binding off and relaxing it completely and then re-gluing it. Like I said before, just doing this even to the waist, it releases 50% of the tension, at least on that side. So there's still this area, but you know that this might be enough to not need this to be redone. So yeah, time will tell, but that's far easier than using the CA glue that Martin recommends. Try both glues and then tell me which one you like better. So thank you, Doug Graham. You are an absolute legend for this canopy glue. So it's the next day. It's always a good idea to heat up the binding tape to kind of relax the adhesion so it doesn't pull out any chips of lacquer or anything like that. So like always, just go slowly and surely and use your brain. I've already taken the top off, or the cleaned and untaped the binding. Why I did that and didn't show you is because I want to show you how easy it is to clean up the residue of the canopy glue, and it shows up better on mahogany. Just make sure you use a lacquer safe tape. The StewMac orange stuff seems to be that. It does leave sometimes a bit of a line. In general, leaving tape on for as short amount of time as possible is the right decision. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how easy it is just to clean up this dirty residue stuff with clean cold water. So here's a nice shot of the residue, and just got some Bounty paper towel. See, this just comes off super easy. There's some stubborny bits, so stuff like that. It's a little bit thicker, and that just requires, 10 seconds more rubbing. This is mostly residue of residue, which might not sound like a word or a phrase, but it's more like just the cloudy residue of kind of like gluey water. So it's not really the residue I want to show you how easy it is to get off. That is pretty much done for that cloudy stuff, but there is some more troublesome stuff. So this is the part that is the thickest, blobbiest stuff. And if I just do the same thing, paper towel, that's almost gone. So any glue residue that you don't bother wiping off or decide not to or can't reach or whatever, worst case scenario is you have to spend that long getting it off. So it's like 10-15 seconds a blob kind of thing. So it's really, really easy. One side of a guitar, it's kind of a couple of minutes. And for this little side blob, same thing. So this is a damp piece of paper towel. I'm not introducing enough water into the seam to weaken the glue in there or anything. This is just dealing with the surface glue. There's a tiny bit of tape residue here which isn't coming off with water. So what I found is to go basically one step back from water, and I'm not necessarily saying this is what you should buy or use, but whatever grit this is, it says it eliminates 2,500 grit, sanding marks, oxidization and scratches. There's one finer than this in the Jezcar range, but it I've used it before and it doesn't seem to get rid of the it's more adhesive kind of residue. So naphtha probably also works just fine, but when I do this I'm also just polishing up the area which might be a little bit dull from working it so much, so I don't mind just, instead of using naphtha, using some cloth or some paper towel. This is Viva paper towel, which I've got always up here, and I use that for finish work. And the Bounty, the other stuff I use, is kind of rougher, and I use that for cleaning CA and wiping CA glue onto areas. And for some reason the Viva towel, it kicks off the CA glue a lot faster than the Bounty. I think it's because of well, it's just whatever is in this, the cotton content maybe, it kicks it off quicker, so it ain't good. But that's all good now. I did try and film this, but I couldn't get the marks to show up, so don't worry. So for this job, everywhere else looks really good as you can make it without attending to the finish crack along the entire binding line where you scored. It's just how it is with binding coming away. You can fix it by drop filling nitro or CA glue all down it, but it adds so much time to the repair. And for this sort of thing, I just think you got to live with that crack or buy a new guitar. Depends on the guitar, but you know, maybe if it was a D45 from 2014 or something, you might want to take the extra time to drop fill everything so you can't feel it. But it doesn't really feel any worse than, you know, a vintage instrument where you can feel the transition from the side to the binding, and it's not like a visual thing. But it's I think this is going to be an ongoing problem for this guitar and every other guitar from this period for Martin, which, you know, sucks. The one last thing I've got to do is this little gap. I'm just going to tape that off and use multiple layers of CA glue. There's a couple of ways to do it. There's, if you've got a slither of extra binding, you can slip it into there with some acetone or something to melt the sides. You can also use binding shavings and then blob them into a paste with acetone and then paste that into it, spatula it into it, let it set. Or you can do what I'm going to do and use some dark brown CA glue. It's quick, it's easy, it does the job, and it's just as good as everything else. So, all done. Sounds good. By the way, if bindings aren't glued in well to a guitar, the guitar loses tone. Probably think that's weird, but if you ever have a instrument that is just a box like this, So when a guitar's like this is bound, but pretend I just box it up. It will sound like that, but when you cut the binding ledge, it sounds like this. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So it's actually quite revealing when the difference between well-fitting bindings and not well-fitting bindings. The guitar does not sound very good. It sounds actually absolutely horrible if the bindings aren't glued in properly. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something and that this was of interest. Thanks to Doug Graham on the Loothgroup for the canopy glue, and see you next time.